Happy Wednesday to you. Let's continue our look at the book of 1 John. Like last week, John is going to continue his theme on how can you discern whether or not you are a true believer. What are some assurances we might have? And this week, John takes seriously some of the resistance that wells up in us as we consider loving somebody else, especially with our practical goods, our money, or things that are within our power to love in deed and truth rather than just words. So let me read. We're going to start in 1 John chapter 3, verse 19, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. By this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of the Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. Whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. I don't know about you, but those first few verses are actually a little bit confusing to me as I first read through them. And there's been some debate on how to interpret these verses. One view that I think is actually quite persuasive and makes best use of the context of these verses takes a look at that word reassure. Here in the ESV it says, reassure our heart before him. This word is used over 50 times in other places in the New Testament, and every other place it's used is not interpreted as reassure. It's interpreted as persuade or convince. And if that's how we read it here, which I think makes sense, then we start to get a sense of this passage that John's starting to talk about something a little bit different. He's talking about doing some battle, actually, with our hearts and some of these selfish urges that start to rise up. So if last week, if we love people by giving our goods to them within our means, and that is one of the ways that we can be reassured that we are indeed in relationship with God, here he's starting to talk about there may be some resistance to that. I know that I can certainly relate to that personally. I'm sure that you can too. I don't always willingly and joyfully give of my things to other people to love them. So there's a battle that happens there between who we used to be, that before Jesus came to save us, our old self, so to speak, and who Jesus is making us into by the power of his Spirit. There's a battle there going on. So what John then is saying here is that by this, as we give our goods away, we know that we are of the truth and convince our heart before him being God. Convince our heart to actually be loving rather than what our selfish desires are. For whenever our heart condemns us, whenever our heart is saying, don't do that, it makes no sense. Why would you give these things away from us? Then John says, remember that our God is greater than our hearts. In other words, our God is way more generous than we could ever possibly imagine. And he shared that generosity with us. So there's a motivation to be more like our God. And God knows everything. He knows what we're struggling with. He knows our sin. He knows that we're selfish, yet we can still trust him with all of those things. So John is encouraging us to convince our hearts when they raise up all these justifications why not to love in practical ways, to do it anyway. And then when we do it anyway, we have confidence before our God that there's actually a change that's happening inside of us. That's not a change we can do on our own. That's evidence of the Spirit shaping and changing our hearts, and that gives us confidence before our God. It gives us confidence as we pray before him that he'll listen to us because we're his children. He's bought us by his blood. It's the blood of his own son. And he'll listen to us. I think this makes much better sense of the thrust of this passage. And toward the end of our passage, he says that we have also been given the Spirit. Every place here in 1 John, when the Spirit's brought up, the Spirit's work is to witness to who Jesus is. So if we have the Spirit, we are believing the Spirit's testimony about who Jesus is, and the Spirit's at work inside of us because now we trust him to save us, and he's changing us. And all of that can be evidenced by how we actually love other people in practical and tangible ways, by giving away these goods that we hold so tightly to. This makes no sense to the world, yet it's a motivation of ours by the grace of God alone. So rather than seeing this as simple legalism, that give away your stuff because you're God's child, rather this is a work of the Spirit in us and it's evidence of something that God is doing within us. So If you are seeing that in your life, I hope that assures you you're seeing evidence of God's work in your heart. If you're struggling with that, I ask that you pray. Pray that God would help to overcome that resistance that builds up in us. I hope you have a fantastic day.